Welcome to TDCC's 59th live webinar, Helping Children Focus, Transforming Attention, and Addressing ADHD. TDCC is honored to welcome back Debbie Gilmore, a dedicated educational leader, for another insightful session in our webinar series. As the Executive Director of the Aerosmith program, Debbie brings a wealth of experience as a teacher, principal, and administrator. With a master's in education and graduate certifications in diverse learning, she is deeply passionate about the brain's role in learning and student success. Debbie has been a strong advocate for integrating neuroplastic programming into education to enhance cognitive functioning and foster lifelong learners. She pioneered an initiative to bring the Aerosmith program to schools and has since led its strategic growth, championing its transformative impact on students' lives. As both an educator and a parent, Debbie has witnessed firsthand the life-changing potential of the program for students and the communities that support them. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Debbie Gilmore.
There you go. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, and hello, everyone. It's such a delight to be here with you all today. Thank you for returning to this webinar series if you are coming back. And for those that are joining us for the first time in my series of webinars anyway, it's really lovely to have you here with me. Mylene, are you happy for me to share my screen now?
Yes, please, Debbie.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, it's really lovely. So just bear with me while I share this screen. Here we are. Just 1 minute, it's not working for me. There we are. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Fabulous. Great. Terrific. Well, as I said, as Mylene said, and thank you for that really lovely introduction, Mylene, today's webinar is about transforming attention and addressing ADHD. I can't tell you how many times I speak with parents and educators about this hot topic of attention. So what I've done today is try to tackle it from a number of angles, looking at the questions that people sent in as part of your registration. I tried to categorize those, and I've looked at, as I said, attention from a number of different angles. As I said, this webinar is a series. This is number 3, so it's really great. This is the first of 2025, and you'll see here there's another 3 to go that I'm delivering. Of course, TDCC are offering webinars all the time. They offer a fabulous series of webinars across the year. This is the agenda I was hoping to offer today. I'm going to look at the role of the brain. Aerosmith is all about the brain, so I really have to be front and center with Aerosmith right at the beginning. Then I'm going to take a look at attention and what it is. I'm then going to have a look at what sits underneath the term attention, what's going on in the brain, and then what about attention span? There's a lot about this in the media right now. So I just want to touch on that very briefly. Then I'm going to look at ADHD and attention difficulties. There were a number of questions about evidence-based approaches and research, so I'm going to touch on research there. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Aerosmith and then hand over to the TDCC team to tell you a little bit about Aerosmith at TDCC. So let's dig in here about the role of the brain in, there we are, the role of the brain in our lives. We know that it is absolutely our most important asset. Just like we look after our heart, we know that's important to keep us alive, so is our brain. And in fact, trivia piece of information, whatever is good for the heart is good for the brain. So any of those practices that we put in place for our heart is going to help our brain and our brain health. So we don't think about this very often, but every single thing we do, every single minute of the day has our brain behind it. It is responsible, our brain is responsible for every task we do, and even while we sleep. So the brain is responsible for very simple tasks to very complex tasks. And what's driving that is a series of highways and stations or networks and connections in the brain that come together to do tasks. A concept that Arrowsmith is based on is the concept of neuroplasticity, that the brain can change. I have to say, when I first started my teaching career, I was told that brains were fixed, that they could not be changed. Thankfully, the research of now over 60 or 70 years has actually about 70 years has told us irrefutably that the brain can change. And now we are able to employ cognitive work to increase the capacity of our brain, increase how it functions. And that's through the concept of neuroplasticity. Now, I'm going to talk, it's important that I talk about this here because I'm going to reference it later on in my presentation. So basically, this principle is pretty simple, that the brain has the ability to change its physical structure and its functional organization to form new neural connections throughout life. This is probably not a new concept to you, but I just needed to touch on this. The principles there on that other slide there were the principles that need to be employed to make that neuroplastic change. But one thing that's important in my talk today is that the concept of neuroplasticity is neither good nor bad. It's a neutral concept. The concept is that it is inevitable that our brain is changing. We can't not learn. The brain cannot not learn. The good thing is we actually can control neuroplasticity if we really have intention to change our brains. And this last concept is really important. The brain adapts to what it does most. I'm going to come back to that. So just keep that in mind. The brain adapts to what it does most. Another thing that's important to understand for my presentation today is the concept of cognitive functions. In the brain, as I talked before, it's a series of networks, connections in the brain. So cognitive functions are a region or a network that have a specific job. So we have different cognitive functions in the brain that have different jobs. And those cognitive functions can work on a scale from very superior to very severe. And the good news is that no matter where you are on that continuum, you absolutely have the possibility to move our functioning. We can always make it better, no matter where we are on that continuum. Here are some of the cognitive functions that Arrowsmith really concentrate on. There are many cognitive functions of the brain, but these are just some of them. And we have our own names for them. This is not an exam. You don't need to remember this. This is all on our website, but you can absolutely see that each one has a particular job. And I'm going to talk about two of those in particular today. We have different names for them. And the two I'm going to focus on today are those two on the top right-hand side, symbolic thinking and symbol relations. Just like I said, all of these cognitive functions are on a continuum. This means that all of us have a unique cognitive profile. So everyone here in this webinar today absolutely has all of those functions working at different levels along that continuum, leading to that unique profile. So let's get into attention. What is it? So you probably know that attention is located in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. It's like you have to think of it as the CEO of attention. This is what we need working well to drive attention. I'm going to argue it's not the only they're not the only functions that are involved, but it is the driving force. It's the CEO of attention. Attention, everyone probably has an idea about what attention is. So I'm going to let you think about that for a minute. What do you think it is? Sometimes we know when attention isn't there. We can see that. But what is attention? So it's things like staying on topic in a conversation, or being self-directed or motivated, taking a mental initiative. Planning and organizing is the responsibility of the prefrontal cortex of attention. We need that. And that means we're goal setting, we're executing tasks, we're achieving, and we're independent because we have that independent thought, because we can plan and organize. I want to talk about the networks that are involved here. It's very, very high level. I am not a scientist, but it makes sense to me just to make sure we know what we're talking about in terms of these networks. So these are the 4 networks that have been investigated as part of research for Arrowsmith. There's the default mode network, which is the network that says, okay, I'm thinking. Then there's the dorsal attention network that says, what's going on here? Then there's the salience network, very important, because that's the network that says, what's important? So I'm thinking, what's going on, making sense, what's important in all of this information. And the frontoparietal executive control network that says, how should I respond to this? So I'm thinking, I'm understanding, I have to work out what's important. Now I've got to do something with it. This is all implied in attention. We need all of these working really well to be attentive. And as I mentioned, this researchers have looked into participants that have been in Arrowsmith actually and have seen stronger connections within these networks and between these networks. So they are very important. I'll come back to some more research later on. So if a network is supporting a brain function, so go back to thinking about those cognitive functions. So if a network is supporting a brain function, is repeatedly stimulated through practice and training, neuroplasticity, it will become stronger, contributing to the optimization of that brain function. Really, that's the basis of what Arrowsmith is all about. So I'm going to go one level down now and say, what lies beneath attention? What is sitting under here? So here are some of the cognitive functions that I talked about that Arrowsmith can address. What are the cognitive functions that we need for attention? I'm going to focus on these 2, symbolic thinking and symbol relations. Symbol relations is probably, these are probably 2 of the most important cognitive functions that we need. We need them both working well. We need symbol relations working well because it's responsible for understanding and connecting ideas and processes, like connecting the dots. So if you remember those networks, it's I'm thinking, what's going on here? That's this. The symbol relations is what's going on here? I have to understand what this is. Symbol relations is all about understanding. If we need to attend, if we have to pay attention to something, we first have to understand what it is, because we will pay attention to what we understand. So it's, as I said here, it's responsible for understanding, connecting ideas. That means we read and comprehend the text that we're reading or the conversation we're listening to. We understand what is required in a task because we're being able to comprehend what is involved in that task. We realize the consequences. If we do this, then this is going to happen. And this enables us to engage in conversations, to be attentive in conversations. And then we have the symbolic thinking cognitive function that sits in our left prefrontal cortex. And that is about planning and organizing in language. So this is responsible for thinking, planning, problem solving, goal setting, task execution, and maintaining attention. This, if we then look at that with an attention focus, this helps us manage workload. It helps us complete assignments on time. It helps us attend to the detail, and it helps us establish routines and remain organized. So they're very two important cognitive functions here. So I'm going to take a little bit of a sidebar conversation now about attention span. So a lot of information about this in the media right now, and a lot of it is around the use of screens. So I want to touch on that before I delve into attention difficulties. So I did a little bit of research, not hard to find this on the internet. The average attention span in 2000 was 12 seconds. In 2015, it had reduced to 8 seconds. In 2022, it was 5 seconds. So that's the average attention span. Let's go to an average screen attention span. How long can we attend on a screen? The average attention span is 150, it was 150 seconds in 2004. 2013, it was 75 seconds. It's now 47 seconds. There's lots of research papers on this, and Dr. Gloria Mark has done a lot of work on this. If you think about just our own individual use of screens, and in particular, let's think about our phone or a tablet that we might use a lot. And I'm not talking about the work that we do. Just think about what we do on our own screens as adults in our personal lives. We have a continuous stream of digital stimuli. The stimuli is asking us, it's intended for us to skim it and switch. Skim and switch. So like look, flick, look, flick, look, flick. That's what the most of our, I'm gonna make generalizations here and apologize for that, but that's what certain applications on phones and screens are asking to do. Look and flick, look and flick. So we are, and versus, as I say here on this screen, versus being patient and immersed in learning. Herbert Simon has said decades ago, actually, that a wealth of information, which we're presented with all the time, creates a poverty of attention. So we have this constant stream of stimuli, and we're having to divide our attention between all of this stimuli. So I want to go back to the use of screens, because I hear this a lot from parents and educators, actually, that we're trying to reduce screen time. I totally understand that concept in what I've just spoken about, in that stream of digital stimuli and what it's asking us to do. It's not so much the screen itself. The fact that we're on a screen, it's not so much the screen itself that's causing the attention span difficulty. It's what's on the screen and how we're engaged with the application. So it's not the screen really that's causing the decline in attention. It's what's being done on the screens. And I want to make, just before I move on, I want to say here, a declining attention span or a short attention span does not mean someone has ADHD. So I just want to make that distinction, okay? And then as I mentioned before, Dr. Gloria Mark makes a really good point. Our average screen attention is 47 seconds, but it doesn't mean we're doomed to live an unfocused life. Why? Because of this because we have the power of neuroplasticity. We have control over what our brain does. And remember this concept, the brain adapts to what it does most. So just think about that example that I gave. Look and flick, look and flick, look and flick. We're doing that to our brains, actually. The more we do that, the more our brain will adapt to that. That's neuroplasticity. So we can increase attention through the power of neuroplasticity. And in fact, we have seen that in our research. Okay, so that's kind of a sidebar conversation, but I think I wanted to talk about it because attention is so out there in the media. So let's talk now about ADHD and attention difficulties. As I mentioned, we probably all have an idea about what attention is or what it looks like if someone is not attending. This is what it can look like in a classroom. And in fact, these little bubbles that I put on the screen here are from an interview I heard with a teacher on radio just a couple of weeks ago, where teachers are seeing this inattention in the classroom and for lots of different reasons. And I think there's a heightened awareness of it since COVID. And as we can see through that history of attention spans that was on the decline anyway, but I think it's been highlighted through COVID and probably for a lot of other reasons that I'm not going into here. But what do attention difficulties look like in the classroom? So it looks like inconsistent academic performance. So a student might be attending to one thing, but not another. And so the report cards, the grades fluctuate. It looks like incomplete assignments. Sometimes I hear parents say, oh, they're really happy to do this, but they are not attending to this. So how do I make that balance? So we see incomplete assignments, we see incomplete homework, or they're missing deadlines. They struggle to stay engaged in activities. They struggle to stay engaged in activities and discussions. They can be a little bit disruptive or have difficulty following rules. They have poor attention to detail, or they're described as inattentive or hyperactive or easily distracted. The thing is, if you have attention difficulties in the classroom, unless we do something about it, they're not going away. They're going to stay in the workplace. So in the workplace, what does it look like? There's time management challenges. So someone who has this difficulty has a workload to do and they can't manage it. So either they have a poor performance review at work, or they're spending many, many, many more hours outside of work hours to try and complete tasks. So they have difficulties prioritizing their tasks. They're easily distracted and overwhelmed with tasks. When the to-do list gets a little bit high, and we all feel this overwhelmed feeling, and then what do? Is we say, okay, I've got to take control of this task and I'm going to prioritize. Someone with attention difficulties actually have a difficulty in prioritizing. So that whole workload is unmanageable, and everything actually, if there's a difficulty with one of these prefrontal cortex functions, everything has the same importance. So that's why they can't prioritize. They struggle reading long emails. I don't know how many times I've talked now in emails where I really try to keep them short. I only really try to keep them to a few sentences, because I don't know if you feel like this, but when I get a long email, I go, oh, it feels like a bit of work. And I become a bit more inattentive as I read longer and longer emails. And there's a poor attention to detail. Some work requires very good attention to detail. Someone with attention difficulties has a problem there. And they are unable to receive constructive criticism or feedback because they actually may not be aware that they're having attention difficulties. And then what happens in life? What's happening for someone that has attention difficulties in their life? Well, they're struggling to establish and follow self-care routines. They're struggling to have personal organization. They find it hard to initiate a task or get through to completion. They're unable to create or plan or take long-term goals. They struggle to maintain jobs and attention because they're not really able to attend to the relevance of many of those tasks that are required to keep a job or to keep in a relationship. They kind of feel stuck and can't get past that roadblock because they're not able to plan and organize over the roadblock. And then, as I said, just in workplace, they feel overwhelmed in their lives, in life decisions. There's always times when we feel like that in our lives. But this is a constant state of being for someone with attention difficulties. So what Arrowsmith likes to do is we go under labels. We have many students that come in, or many participants that come into Arrowsmith that have a label or a diagnosis of attention difficulties or ADHD. That's fine, but actually it's irrelevant for Arrowsmith because we go under those labels and see what is causing the behaviors that have given the diagnosis. So again, I'm just going to touch on these cognitive functions again, symbolic thinking. I talked about if this is the planning and organizing in language. Someone that is having a difficulty here with all of these things. I've touched on these before in those previous slides, but these are the things that someone is having difficulty with. And again, symbol relations, that understanding. This cognitive function is responsible for bringing new information into the brain, connecting it with known information. It helps us understanding, helps us what to pay attention to and what to plan and organize in. So it helps that prefrontal work, that prefrontal function of symbolic thinking. It needs symbol relations working in tandem. So both of these cognitive functions need to be really strong. Someone with a symbol relations deficit, as I talked about before, they have a problem with reading comprehension. They find it difficult to understand mathematical reasoning. If they can't understand it, then they're not going to pay attention to it. If they can't understand a movie, they're not going to pay attention to it. If they don't understand a conversation, they're not going to pay attention to it. So that's what we're dealing with here. If we go under the label of attention difficulties, that's what people are having problems with if those two cognitive functions are underperforming. Arrowsmith has a particular view, and in fact, our founder, Barbara Arrowsmith-Young, this is her view on ADHD. And as I said to you, it's we kind of go under that label and look at what the diagnosis works on behaviors, on observable behaviors. So what is underlying those behaviors that then give that diagnosis? So there are two areas for sure that Arrowsmith cannot work with. And that is, if someone is having emotional difficulties or has trauma that is that's not dealt with, that can cause inattention. And Arrowsmith cannot address that because there needs to be some sort of therapeutic process happening to help the trauma, to help the emotional difficulties. And then many times the attention can be brought back because the feelings, the mental health issues are being taken care of. There's another subcortical challenge where there is absolutely difficulty in regulating arousal and attention. Again, medical outside of Arrowsmith's realm. We can't help with that. But there are two other aspects that Arrowsmith absolutely can help with. I've already talked about one of them, the fourth one here on the right-hand side at the bottom, where the right or left prefrontal cortex functions or the symbolic thinking function is underperforming. We absolutely can strengthen those functions to perform better. And our aim is to bring those cognitive functions to average so that They're just able to do everything that is required in that plan, understanding, planning, and organizing, paying attention. They absolutely can be strengthened. Then there's another one where there are multiple cognitive functions that are underperforming. Not necessarily these two that I've talked about, symbol relations and symbolic thinking, but there could be others as well. Remember that whole list of cognitive functions that I talked about? Well, this is what we call cognitive load. On that slide before, you saw cognitive load. So I am now going to ask Angelo for his help here. Angelo, welcome. And I would like all of our participants today, Angelo, to listen to you speak to us. And participants, I'm going to ask you questions. So Angelo, please start talking.
Ang pambihirang sombrero. Mahilig mangolekta ng kakaibang mga gamit si Mia. Isang araw, naghalungkat si Mia sa lumang baul ng kanyang lola. Laking tuwa niya nang makatagpo siya ng sombrero. Kakaibang itsura nito. Humarap si Mia sa salamin para sukatin ang sombrero. Sinubukan niyang isuot ito sa iba't ibang paraan. Ngunit naisip niya, bakit parang may kulang? Lumabas ng kanilang bahay si Mia nagtungo sa tindahan sa tapat. Magandang umaga, Manang Sol, pati ni Mia. Maganda po ba ang aking sombrero? Oo, Mia. Pero mas maganda kung lalagyan pa natin ng alkansya, sagot ng tindera. Nagulat si Mia sa handog sa kanya. Salamat po, Manang Sol, sabi ni Mia. Sunod na pinuntahan ni Mia ang panaderya. Mang Rico, tawag ni Mia. Maganda po ba ang aking sombrero? Oo, Mia. Pero mas maganda kung palalamutian na natin ng kandelebra. Sagot ng panadero.
Angelo, I'll ask you to stop. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to guess that some of our participants today understood what Angelo was saying. I'm also going to guess that, like me, I didn't. But I said I would ask questions, but maybe not the questions that you were thinking I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask if you experienced any of the following. Did you have difficulty learning what Angelo was trying to teach you? Did you feel a little bit restless or squirmy because of your experience? Were you daydreaming? Were you a little bit fearful because I was going to ask you questions and you might not know the answer? Were you distracted? Would you feel like you might be getting a headache? Or did you feel frustrated from that experience? Did you feel like disturbing others? Might you develop a stomachache if you had more experience with that? Imagine if you were a student in a class and you had that experience 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 40 weeks a year for 13 years of your life. That's the experience of some children, actually. Any children that have cognitive functions that are underperforming and those cognitive functions are not being strengthened, they feel all of those experiences that you were feeling on a constant basis. Now, if we listen to Angelo speak for all of those hours that I talked about, maybe we would pick up some of that language and we would be able to learn. But how long would that take? Those descriptors of behaviors that I just asked you to reflect on were actually listed, and there's many, many more of them, but they're listed on the Conners rating scale. And the Conners rating scale is very, very often used to diagnose ADHD. So I'm going to go back to my concept of cognitive load. So for a child that's sitting in a classroom or an adult that's living life, and they are sitting in that experience of not really understanding consistently what is going on, or in some aspects of that, you might understand some areas, but not understand other areas. It feels like this load, and it's very difficult to learn. So this is what we call cognitive load. If these functions are underperforming, it can feel like that. And you get those inattentive behaviors. So once the cognitive load is improved, or those underperforming cognitive functions are increased and even get to average or above average, that cognitive load is lifted. And then that person or the children, whoever we're talking about, absolutely can live independent lives. If you're interested in finding out what's causing attention difficulties, there's a cognitive questionnaire. You'll receive this link as part of these reviews here. And then I encourage you to fill it out. What that will do is, and you can fill it out for yourself or someone that you love, what will tell you at the end of that questionnaire is which of the cognitive functions are underperforming. So if you want to know a little bit more, what are the cognitive functions that are giving those attention difficulties? Let's hear now from Tony. He's a parent of a child that had ADHD. Here we are.
But it's my son's third year in the program. So he was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia after his English teacher advised us that he was having problems with reading comprehension and grammar mechanics. So about halfway through his first year in the program, I noticed some changes in his personality and his abilities. He started drawing logical conclusions and thinking independently. Previously, I would have to guide him to the right conclusions so he wouldn't make what seemed to be random guesses. But it was logical to him, but it just wasn't logical to me. He was able to somewhat control his emotions a little bit better. So whereas previously he would get frustrated when trying to express his thoughts, and I saw after being in the program, he was able to kind of pick his words more carefully to get his ideas across. And so he felt like he was being heard. And so he was also began to be more confident as he worked through the Aerosmith program. He began to develop this growth mindset, and he became more confident in his abilities. Now he's willing to try more challenging tasks, but one of the greatest achievements he's had this year is he was inducted into the National Beta Club, which is awesome. Not only because he is maintaining an A&B average, but he's doing the work himself. I don't have to look over his shoulder to make sure he's getting his work done or he's getting it accomplished. I kind of ask him, hey, you're getting your work done? You're getting your homework done? And he's like, yeah, Dad, I got it. Overall, I've been very pleased with the program. I've been extremely satisfied. And if he were here, he would tell you the same. He's been pleased with it as well.
So I did promise I'm going to very quickly touch on what the research is saying. And again, you'll get this in the slides when in the recording. But the researchers, the independent researchers that have worked with investigating participants that have done Aerosmith have found these significant changes in these areas. So there's been brain imaging, and all of these ones that are in green are the ones that particularly have focus on attention. They're the ones that I've tried to pick out of these research results. So all of the brain connectivity and those 4 networks, and I talked about it before, the connections within the networks and between the networks have all been strengthened. In here, just to give you a description here are the networks for students without learning disabilities, this is what they look like. And there's the range. So they're kind of sitting in that middle range, and they're performing they're not hyper-connected or hyper-connected or hypo-connected. For students with learning difficulties, the networks look different. They're sitting up, they're hyper-connected, or they're really weak and hypo-connected. And so this is what we see. This is what the research has found. After engaging in an Arrowsmith program, the networks came back to more that middle line where they're operating neither in strength, in too fast strength, or too weak. They're operating as they should. So one area is not compensating for a weak area. They're all working as they should right across those networks. In the standardized measures that researchers use in the cognitive domains, these were areas that I've highlighted here, have had particularly related to attention. There's probably other measures here and results here that are needed for attention, but I just looked at the obvious ones. And again, in academic achievement, it can lead to academic, attention focus leads to this academic achievement. And then in well-being and social emotional intelligence, there were a number of questions that was sent through about the emotional intelligence of students with, or the emotional needs of students with, or children with ADHD. So what we've seen is these measures have also been increased and had positive changes as they've done Arrowsmith. So what is Arrowsmith? Arrowsmith is a cognitive program. Oops. It's a cognitive program. It's been around for 46 years. It used science to be created, and it continuously is backed by science. It uses those principles of neuroplasticity to change the brain. They're inherent in the program. Those principles of neuroplasticity have been around for decades now, more than half a century. And so that's the program is absolutely built on those. And the Arrowsmith program is by design going to strengthen the brain to learn more efficiently and effectively. It's what we call a capacity-based program, so it actually isn't a workaround program or an accommodation program. Instead, we absolutely go to the brain and we change the capacity of the brain, the capacity of the student. It's across the world. We're about to add Portugal to that map. So it's right around the world and accessed. And TDCC have an absolute, we have a beautiful working relationship with TDCC in the United Arab Emirates to work with young children. It's really wonderful. And adults, actually. I believe I was speaking with Emma. Emma, I'm going to hand over to you now to talk about Arrowsmith at TDCC.
Hi, thank you, Debbie, and thanks for everybody for joining. Thanks, Debbie, for your presentation. It was very insightful. So just to give you a bit of steps if you're interested in Arrowsmith, unfortunately, we do not offer training in Arrowsmith for any professionals. If you are interested in that, Debbie is your go-to person, but we are very fortunate to be able to offer it to children and adults. We have three wonderful teachers who have just been trained, and they've been doing the programme for a couple of months. We have 3 different slots that are on offer times to try and accommodate busy children that we all have. And we have one in the morning that can be done before school. So how you would get onto the Arrowsmith programme is you can contact TDCC and speak to Liberty or myself, and we can get you registered. We will then send you a questionnaire. Now, this is a generic questionnaire that will kind of give you an insight into your learning profile, as Debbie had spoke about. Then the next step would be, if you are really interested and Arrowsmith seems like the right fit for you, we would give you an assessment. The assessment is 6 hours long, but we don't do that all in one day because, as you know, it can be quite tiring. So we break it down into 2-hour slots. Then once this is completed, we'll have your individualised learning profile where we're able to see what cognitive functions as an individual you're struggling with. And then when we have that information, we're able to set up an individualised Arrowsmith programme that will identify the cognitive functions that you're struggling with. So if like with the ADHD, it will come up that attention is part where you struggle with. And what the Arrowsmith programme does is giving you an activity that isolates the bit of the brain that attention would be used, and it stimulates that part of the brain, and it helps connect the brainwave. So it's a very interesting programme. I've been lucky enough to work, well, I actually went to Toronto with 2 students and they did the programme there for the summer. And one of the students, he was on medication. He had tried all types of therapies and kind of hit a roof of he couldn't go any further. But Arrowsmith helped him go from 1 percentile with processing speed to the 50th percentile, which is absolutely outstanding. We had tried medication, we had tried everything. So it really is an effective programme, and not only for academics, for day-to-day life. It really just helps an individual cope better, understand the world around them, understand themselves. So really happy to have it at TDCC, and we're great advocates for the change that it has made in young people. And as Debbie said, we have adults that are now starting the programme who want to change their life and make life a bit easier and less stressful. And the fact that it actually helps with people's mental health, anxiety, stress, which is a big thing nowadays. So it is really, really great. So if there's any more questions or any interest, feel free to get in touch with us at TDCC, but I'll hand it back over to Debbie for any last questions.
Thanks so much, Emma. And yes, it's question time. I've picked up a couple here. How can we improve? This is what was sent through. How can we improve attention in kids with ADHD? As Emma said, Arrowsmith provides an exercise particularly to strengthen those individual cognitive functions. Then students engage in that over a period of time, and we bring those to average. How do we calm a child with ADHD? What I can tell you is if you're sitting in that classroom and not understanding what's going on, and if you can't pay attention, that's very stressful. The world, if you're not understanding your world, that's very stressful. Anxiety goes up. I have seen this with my own son, who is an Arrowsmith alumni. His anxiety was very, very high because actually he had no idea really what was coming at him next, because he really didn't understand the world. His symbolic thinking, his symbol relations, along with 12 other cognitive functions, were all in deficit. And when we started to address those, he came off his anxiety medication. And he's 30 now. He's never had to return to going to do that because he understands the world around him. Another question was, can you give attention enhancing and hyperactivity reducing strategies? I want to say there are bookshops and internet sites filled with strategies, tips, and these are all workaround tips and strategies. How can we get by this particular task? How can we do this particular task? If you strengthen the cognitive functions of the brain, that's lifelong. The attention comes, and then independently, that individual can get on with the task at hand. There was another question. By the way, there were lots of questions and I really love them. I hope I've addressed a lot of them in my presentation. There is one of my students takes an hour to complete a task while the rest of his classmates finished work in 15 minutes. He zones out sometimes and is unable to focus on a task at hand. I'm wondering how to help him develop attention to task and task completion. I think you're going to know what my answer is here. If we strengthen those cognitive functions, it doesn't happen immediately. but these behaviors will start to reduce because they'll be able to pay more attention. They'll be able to focus for longer. They'll be able to be drive initiative, and they'll be able to set goals, and they'll be able to complete tasks. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I do think there's some questions in the chat, and I know I've only got a few minutes. I probably spoke a little bit longer than I wanted to today, but I hope you forgive me for that.
How many sessions do children usually need?
That's it. Thank you. That is a really good question. One of the other things, besides attention being front of mind for many people, society is also being geared up for quick fixes. I'm sorry, Arrowsmith is not a quick fix. It took so many years to develop our brains, and we need to be intentional about keeping them fit and healthy and strong. It takes time. Approximately 4 hours a week over a period of time, we start to see changes in about 3 months. But just like when we go to the gym and we start seeing, we're a bit stronger at that period of time, we don't want to stop there. We want to make it stronger. So we encourage people to be on a program at least around a year, 4 hours a week per cognitive function. So, and if you have any more questions about that for you or your child, Emma can answer those at TDCC. Or please shoot me an email. You have my email address. How can we be trained as an Arrowsmith trainer? Please contact me. You'll have my email address in the recording. Please feel free to do that.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Thank you very much for this very interesting, insightful, as usual, webinar from Arrowsmith program. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. I love being with you. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.